So this is kind of neat. I think that based on what I've seen, what I probably will do next is start copying and pasting code. This video is another entry into our build series for Blazor. And the format of this video series is such that I'm walking you through my thought process for putting an application together from scratch as we build it and try to move forward. In the last video, we looked at building the foundation for a plugin system that we'd be leveraging for the different platforms that we wanted to integrate into our metrics application. We settled on something really simple to begin with, but we said in the next step we wanted to start looking at job scheduling. So in this video, I'm going to be walking us through a little bit of an experiment getting set up with Quartz for .NET. Keep in mind that the format for these types of videos is a lot less clean cut and a lot more experimenting and me playing with code so you can see how I explore things. Before we jump over to Visual Studio, just a quick reminder to check that pinned comment for a link to my free weekly newsletter. Let's go look at some code. Where we left off was placing some code into program.cs, and if I scroll through it pretty quickly, you'll see that the last thing I was talking about was some type of job that we might want to go build, but we did say that we wanted to use a scheduling NuGet package. That's going to be Quartz that we're going to look at together. And if we scroll down a little bit further, you can see that I was talking about building this facade for these social data fetchers that we're going to have plugins for behind the scenes to go fetch data. And I started talking about this idea that when we think about scheduling this type of work, either we're going to have one job scheduler that's going to schedule one job at a time that will be responsible for going through all of the data fetchers through this facade interface. And that might be the case, but we don't know yet. We're just kind of playing around with it. Or we should be able to schedule individual jobs for each plugin. And if we do that approach, then this facade sort of goes away. Beyond that, we're just looking at a couple of DTOs for different things that we're working with here. We started with Twitter, and if I scroll down a little bit further, you can see the Twitter implementation of the plugin we started to build. I'm going to take just a moment to start moving this code out of program.cs. I don't want to totally kill it off yet. I think there might be some helpful things that we can start to stitch together, especially when we have the job scheduler. So what I'm going to do is move these out to separate files. I'm going to organize the code a little bit into folders in the Solution Explorer here on the left, and then we're going to look into Quartz. All right, now that this code is moved out, I'll just take a brief moment to explain how I've started to organize code, and this is by no means the final way that it is intended to be organized. We'll have to see how things evolve. But what I've done is I've made a folder for features. I mentioned in the beginning of this video series that I'm thinking about trying to organize things in vertical slices, so I like having something like a features folder. Again, this might change, but one of the features that I want to have is the ability to get social metrics. And my intention here is that within social metrics, I want to have different plugins for the different platforms we support. Twitter was the first one that we looked at. So you can see that I just made a Twitter folder and dropped our Twitter specific things into there. And then the rest of the stuff that we looked at that was really for just generalized social metrics gathering, not plugin specific, I just have in the folder above the plugin folder. So it's sort of like at a sibling level to it within social metrics. That's the starting point. And I've done that literally just so that we could get back to having within our program.cs file, because I like to use that as a dumping ground when I'm playing around with things. We just have this job class left. And this is also very likely going to go away, but this is where we got to before we wanted to start talking about Quartz. And Quartz is going to be a little bit different than how we looked at tweet envy when we were doing Twitter. And the reason it's going to be a little bit different is because I have literally no idea where to start with when looking at a job scheduling API. With something like Tweet Envy, I've done interactions with different social media platforms, some type of OAuth and authentication. I have the concepts of posts and things like that, followers. I understand roughly how that should work, but when it comes to Quartz, I don't necessarily want to explore code first because I just don't know what I'm getting myself into. I'd rather see if they have some type of documentation and examples. So I'm going to start that way versus let me explore the API and code and feel it out. So first thing I'm going to do is pull up the Quartz documentation and we'll start there. Okay, so I have the Quartz documentation pulled up on my screen, and honestly, the first thing I want to look for is not just the API docs. I want to just see a working example in code. So looking along the left-hand side, they have a sample application bit of code here. And this is pretty cool. It looks like this code right here is just a really simple way to get set up with Quartz. So let's have a quick read through what this code seems to be doing. So we have a factory for a scheduler and getting a scheduler right off of that. We start it. So this async await API in Quartz is good to know, right? We're going to be dealing with async await stuff. This is just a delay, sure, and then shutting down. Oh, and it says with a job scheduler, because there's going to be background threads and things like that, it looks like when we call shutdown, it seems that we call that so that we're good to go in order for the application to end. And yeah, so based on what this text is saying right here, I'm going to scroll down and get this a little bit more in the field of view. We have to wait for that work to finish, right? So you should manually block exiting of application if you want the scheduler to keep running, because otherwise it looks like if we just let this continue on, it will kill everything off. So it looks like that's been a sort of breaking change as a Quartz 3.0. So good to know. Logging setup, I'm not super interested in this right now. Sounds kind of funny. I think logging is incredibly important. I'm just not interested right now. I want to be prototyping this, kind of spiking it out. They have logging support. Good to know. Let's move on. Trying out the application. So this is looking better. So this is showing them running it and the output. I'm assuming that's because if I scroll back up, they have this logging attached. So we probably would not expect to see that if we haven't configured the logging. And oh, they have a hello job. So hello world, right? Cool. This looks really similar. I'm going to flip back over to Visual Studio just for a moment, but we got pretty lucky. It looks like it's a very similar API, right? So I had an async task called run job async. It took in a cancellation token. Theirs is called execute. You need to implement an interface. I like that to start with. That seems really good. It's a good fit. I don't like having to implement abstract classes. For me, that's a bit of a code smell. I don't think that I need an abstract class to accomplish what I would consider for job scheduling, so that's nice. But there's this execution context. I'm assuming that lets us pass data into our jobs. Maybe there's a cancellation token and stuff on that, so that's good to know. And they just have a console write line inside, so oh cool. So we can see it getting set up all here, right? So let's read through this. So define the job and tie it with our hello job class. So we go build the job, and it takes in that type parameter of the hello job. So if I go back to our code, if I had like a Twitter job or something, right? It would take that in. We can give it an identity, so a job and a group. I'm not really sure what the group's for yet. That doesn't seem like it's an issue right this moment. So trigger the job to run now and then repeat it every 10 seconds. So what we haven't talked about is what frequency makes sense for us to be polling for our metrics, right? If we think back to our plugins, we were mentioning that it could be that we have one job that gets scheduled and it's responsible for all of the plugins, or we have multiple jobs that get scheduled, one for each plugin. Maybe there's a hybrid where they're in groups, but what's the cadence? And do we need to have a different cadence for different plugins? So to give you an example, do I want to pull my Twitter following every minute, right? Or every hour, whatever it happens to be. But LinkedIn, I want to do once a day. Do we need that level of granularity? I'm not really sure, but that's something we should be thinking about in terms of what's available to us and how we want to design this. Right now, I don't see a huge need for that, but if we can do it easily, having the flexibility might be kind of nice. So it looks like we can do, it says with a simple schedule, and we give it an interval and how many times I'm assuming how many times. We can do it also for forever. To me, this indicates with this kind of syntax, we could still go both directions. We could trigger one job that will go run across all our social platforms. But what that will mean is that it's sort of, if I can use like the word coupling, how we configure that schedule to run for all of the social platforms. They're all tied together in one job. That starts to feel, I don't like, part of me is like, that doesn't feel great. We don't really have there's no functional requirement on this, but to me, it just doesn't feel ideal to couple that stuff together when we could have the flexibility. It seems like we could have the flexibility to do each of these jobs per platform pretty easily, as long as we just go build a new job and schedule it. So maybe we do want to change up our approach a little bit. Let's keep going. And this is piecing it all together. We've already seen some of this code, right? So I kind of skipped over the logging stuff, but they have the factory and the scheduler that they start up. This is the code we just looked at to go make that job and give it the schedule that it needs. And then we schedule it, we wait. So this will wait for a minute, and this is supposed to be every 10 seconds it goes. So we should see by the end of this running that we would have that code going multiple times. So this is kind of neat. I think that based on what I've seen, what I probably will do next is start copying and pasting code. I'm going to get the NuGet package installed, and then I'm going to take the code that they have on this page, drop it into program.cs, and I'm going to see what we can do to get almost like a hello world job set up. But before this video is over, what I'd like to do is see if we can call into our Twitter, like make a Twitter job basically. And if it's not a Twitter job, then it's all of the social media being run. So I want to, by the end of this video, get a feel for if we're going to do one big job for all of them or multiple jobs, and see how that fits into the plugin system. That's what I'm hoping this kind of investigation is going to show us at the end. So let's dive into it. Okay, so, well, I'm going to break all the rules of programming, even though everyone does this. I'm just going to copy and paste all of the code that's on this screen and start massaging it into our program, right? So I know it's not going to work perfectly like this, but I'm just going to start bringing it in so we have it. So I'm going to bring in this main. I'm going to set up the logger as well. I feel like I might as well. And I'll even take the hello job to begin with. Why not? That way we have something to work and play with here. So let me go ahead and put that into Visual Studio. I'm going to ditch our job that we made before. We're about to remake it anyway with the right API. So I'll put that in here. And I don't have Quartz installed. So let's go get Quartz by going to Manage NuGet Packages. I'm pausing here just so you can see that I'm going to be installing version 3.8. Depending on when you're watching this video, things might be different. So let me go install that. Now that I have it installed, I'm going to get the using statement pulled in. But of course, this code that I copy pasted in is not going to be quite right because it had a private class here, but it also had a main method as well. And I'm using no top level statements, so it doesn't really make sense to have a main method. So let's go ahead, delete that main method. Log provider, I'll pull in Quartz logging. Console log provider is inaccessible. Okay, it's probably because I pasted in the console log provider and it's private. So let's jump to that. That's the case. I probably will have to make some of these things internal and all that, but we'll revisit that as needed. I don't need this console write line stuff. And I think I probably have an extra parenthesis. This is an ambiguous warning because I have Microsoft extensions logging and Quartz logging. So this needs to be Quartz logging. By the time this code gets moved around and stuff, I'm assuming that that's going to go away. And really, the way that this is done with a console logger, probably not code that will exist long term, but we'll use it for now. And then I just got to get rid of that trailing curly brace. And we now have the console log provider. That's cool. And then this is the job that is the hello job. It's just going to write to the console. So I think at this point we have everything. But of course, the way this is configured is I have the whole application starting up beforehand. We're probably not in this video going to set things up to be all ideal in terms of running in background services, like really integrating ASP.NET Core Blazor with Quartz. We'll probably need to come back and revisit that. Put this probably into like some type of like background service or something that will start all this stuff up. We'll have to come revisit that, like I said. What I'm going to do though is I want to see this run. I'm going to not run the application for Blazor. We'll let the setup go, but what I want to see, I want to see that this scheduler runs. And I did this in the previous video, this concept of like, let me just see if I can get their base example working. Because if I can't even have a starting point that feels good, then I don't know if like I change something that's breaking things or what. I should be able to have a nice common starting point and start massaging things. But one thing that I remembered is I got rid of the console read line. I think I will need that just for now, or else this stuff here is not going to do what we want. So I'm going to drop this back in place for now. When I go run this, I'm hoping what we see is just some console output that is not ASP.NET launching a web application in Blazor. So we will see what goes on, have that run. Okay, cool. So we're getting something already. We got the logging that was in there. This is supposed to go every 10 seconds. We just got the second fire, and if I talk for just a little bit longer, hopefully I'm not too annoying, sorry, we should see a third one coming up here, and we go. There we are. So that means that's working. And that's cool. That's not probably super exciting for a lot of people, but I've never used Quartz. I've never seen it in action. So right now, a couple of open questions for me are, one, how do we wire it up properly to ASP.NET? I don't know if we're going to get there in this video because I want to research that a little bit more, I think. And I do want to see us ditch this hello job for something that makes sense for either Twitter, right? That's the one plugin we started with, or we start looking at if we make the this call the facade. Now, as I've been talking through this, I have been leaning more towards having each sort of plugin that we want to do for our social reach program here. I'm thinking that I want each one to have its own type of job. It just seems to be a better fit. But that's going to mean that the plugins that we create each need to provide a job or a factory for a type of job. And that's kind of interesting because the API that we started creating needs to adjust, and that's okay. We've only started with one, so that's not bad shape to be in. If we had 50 plugins already, the maintenance cost of that's going to feel kind of crappy. So we're not there yet. That's good news. But maybe let's think about how the first pass of this, I think I want to ditch that facade and think about allowing the plugins to create their own jobs. And I don't even think that I need to make a new implementation for each plugin. Let me go back to the code and I'll explain why. So I don't think I need to have something like a Twitter job, a Facebook job, an Instagram job. I think that the job I'm going to create is going to be generic, but what it calls inside of that is going to be unique. Now, that's what I'm thinking, but at the same time, that might just be like premature refactoring of things out. So perhaps let's start with making a Twitter job. I might be jumping the gun by trying to come up with a generic one and pass in the logic that we run. Instead, we could just define it directly. That might be better. So let's go ahead. We'll call it Twitter job. And instead of writing to the console, we're going to be calling some Twitter stuff. So what will be interesting about this is that we need to have the Twitter things we built. So if I go back to this plugins folder and pull up the Twitter plugin, I mentioned before that we probably don't want to call this Twitter plugin anymore. This will be like Twitter data fetcher. So we have Twitter data fetcher. We need this thing passed in. And we did put this interface on it called iSocial data fetcher. That's already seeming like we might not even need it if that's just going to be called within here. So what I mean by that is if we were to look at creating this Twitter job, if I had iSocial data fetcher, right? Like what I want, like this is a Twitter job. It doesn't want any social data fetcher. It wants the Twitter one specifically. So it's kind of interesting. Depending on how we do dependency containers and dependency injection, I could ensure that the only thing on the container is going to be the Twitter one. I could do that. But what I probably want is really like this, Twitter data fetcher. And if we have this and we're not using that facade, which is over here, the facade was the only thing really that needed to have this concept of social data fetchers. So truly this might just be a waste, and that's fine. We can go delete that. Right now, this is what I'm thinking we want, but I don't yet know how we do dependency injection. And I don't know that because if I go back up here, this job builder takes a type in like this. These comments are kind of ridiculous now. But if it takes in this type, I don't know how the dependency injection's handled. We might have to go back to the docs and see how that works, but I'm assuming they have something wired up. If we look at, there's no other overrides, description. I wanted to see if there's like dependencies. So yeah, we can go back and see, because I guess first of all, I don't even know if we're allowed to do constructor parameter passing on these. So let's go back to the docs and see, because if we can do this, probably all we want to do is something like this kind of thing here. And I'm hoping context has the cancellation token, and it does. So I want something like this. This, by the way, from what we talked about before, will only fetch data, but we're not doing anything with it. We need to be able to store that somewhere. So we'll have to come back to this still. And then we should be talking about, does that work belong in this job, or do we need to have multiple jobs for reading and writing? That might be just be tons of overkill. So let's go see if we can do the dependency injection with these jobs. And that means we need to come back to the Quartz documentation. So I would like to see if they have anything for dependency injection, integration. So, oh, okay, well, this is cool. We might as well have a peek at this. But this is for ASP.NET Core integration because that's exactly what we're going to be doing. And practical example of the setup. I'm just really hoping to see that we can get dependency injection passed in. I feel like the answer is probably, I feel like it's probably, if it's wired up like this in ASP.NET. So if I search for dependency in here, it says there's one, but I don't know where it is. Oh, see the Quartz. Oh, there we go. I should have, people watching this, you were probably like, hey, it's on your screen. Just stop being an idiot and look at it. So Quartz dependency injection documentation. So let's see this. It says Quartz comes with 2 built-in alternatives for Java Factory, which can be configured via either calling use this or this one's deprecated. So there's one. Oh, they're both deprecated. As of Quartz 332, all jobs produced by default Job Factory are scope jobs. You should no longer use these. By default, Quartz will resolve jobs type from container. Okay, and if there's no explicit registration, Quartz will use activator utilities to construct it and inject its dependencies via the constructor. So jobs should have only one public constructor. That's good to know. This says we're not talking about the persistent job stores yet, but let's have a quick peek here. When using persistent job store, make sure you have a job trigger names for scheduling. Okay. So far not so concerned. This is for the config sections. Okay. I think we might have enough to be able to go back. And I didn't think we were going to be integrating with ASP.NET Core, but maybe that's what we need to do in order to get the dependency injection all hooked up. So let's go back to this documentation that was going to be about the integration. And we can see a base Quartz scheduler. When shutting down, we want jobs to be completed. So I'm going to go take this and I'm going to put it back into this code. It's going to look a little different though. So I think we want both of these. So Quartz dependency injection and generic hosting integration. I'm going to start with just this one here and see how far we get. There's dependency injection. I pasted the code back into here and saw that it wasn't going to compile because I was trying to add it onto here. There's no Quartz directly on that. So this is for maybe something a little bit different. I thought it's a service collection, but these two things don't show up. And that's because I pulled the wrong thing. I need Quartz ASP.NET Core. So let me go back and do that. See, this is why it's important to read the documentation. If I install that, I think we should be in good shape. So let's find out. This might need another using statement pulled in. Fingers crossed we get that all to work. But I think we want something like this. Interesting. This add Quartz one doesn't seem to be here, but I might have misunderstood what's supposed to happen here. So you can add Quartz by invoking extension method, add Quartz server on this. This will add a hosted Quartz server into it. So maybe we don't need this, but we want this. Yeah, okay, this is commented saying ASP.NET Core hosting. So I think we can ditch the other one. And then this doesn't need to exist. But it's not happy. And it looks like it's not happy because I'm doing this stuff out of order. So I see I had this in the wrong spot. So let's put this here, but also this. Okay, peculiar, but I didn't realize, and this is because I'm new to Blazor, I didn't realize that once I started doing this part here, the return type is a Razor Components Builder. And up here, it's still a service collection. So we need to make sure we're doing all this stuff first before we get into this part of this builder pattern. So that's interesting. Now, I want to go back down here and see that we probably want to move some of this stuff around. It means we probably don't need this because we will be running the jobs for the lifetime of the application. So that's cool. We don't need this dummy delay anymore. But we might want to move, just to test this stuff out, we'll pull this and this factory and this log provider. So literally all of it, right? We want our app run back in, but I have that stuff on my clipboard. I think I want to put that stuff into here, but let me see, based on the documentation, they have this Q parameter. What's Q? Q in this case, I called it something different. I called it C. Oh, they call it Q for Quartz, I guess. But they're doing Quartz and adding job. Okay, interesting. So they have a job key, add job, and they're using this. So the syntax is a little different, but I think we can still do this. So I'm going to pull this out and dump it into a comment just so we can play around with it. The logging is interesting. So I need to see where that's going to get configured. I don't think we need to do this scheduler in the way that we have it, but this is what they had in theirs. Right? So let me drop this into a big comment just so we have it to refer back to and I'm not going back and forth to that page. But it looks like they want a job key. I'm going to call it Twitter. What I'm trying to work through here is we're going to make it work for one, which is going to be Twitter, the only one we have. And then we can look at how we would want to extend this and pull this information off of the plugin. So add job, we have a Twitter job. And Twitter job, we're going to run with the identity, the job key that we have here. I changed this to be Quartz because I don't like single letter variables when I don't need them. And the trigger is going to be different. So we'll have this trigger and it wants it for the job key. So that's cool. With an identity, call it Twitter job. And I guess naming up here is supposed to have job in it as well. And we have a trigger on it and then a cron schedule. So this is supposed to be every minute, but can we do with simple schedule? Cool. Let's, let's just take this code, right? And put it here. Boom. That looks good. Okay. I like that. Now, am I missing? There we go. Added a job, added a trigger, and then do we just not need this stuff anymore? That's pretty cool. Okay, interesting. But a couple of things here. One is that I changed the Twitter job. I'm going to jump down to it. It takes in this Twitter data fetcher. We haven't wired anything up yet for dependency injection at this point. So that's one part. What I might do is put this back just for a moment. And I want to see, because I don't want to change too many things at once, right? I'm going to put this back so we can see console write lines coming in. So we'll put console write line. I like hello world. Why not put that? And I'm not making it async. I don't really care right this moment. So we'll do this Twitter job. What this is not validating is the dependency injection part. I do want to come back to that, but it seemed to be a better fit to switch over to see if we can just wire this up with ASP.NET Core first. Then we can talk about the dependency injection. So if I go run this, hopefully it doesn't all explode and we can see printing to the console that we have something going on. So there's the app. That's nice. The console here. Hello. Okay, cool. We already have 2 hello worlds. It's every 10 seconds, so we should see another one roll in any moment now. Please. There we go. A third one. Great. So this does work, which is awesome. I don't have the logging configured, so I'll have to come back and revisit that. But I did say earlier, I don't care right now. So I'll leave it commented. We can come back. I'm going to put a to-do in here. And I like using to-dos in my own personal projects. I have to talk with a team before I do stuff like this in other places, but I'll leave that in there for now. And I think it would be good to make sure that we can get the data fetcher and stuff wired up and we can see if this is feasible. What we might not do, because this video is already getting super long, is figure out and implement the API for pulling off the plugin stuff here, but I want to talk about it. So let's just prove we can get the dependency injection working. Then from there, we'll have a quick chat about the API that we might want to tweak to get our plugins working with this. So this is a little bit embarrassing, but I just spent literally an hour trying to work to get the dependency injection stuff put together. I trimmed it all out because it was just going off the rails, but I finally figured out what was going on. So what I want to do is briefly talk about just this part here for the dependency injection for the Twitter data fetcher. And then what I'm going to do is wrap up this video and we'll talk about some of the API considerations we might want to have about creating jobs out of plugins. So it turns out that there's a really big problem with primary constructors, either with Quartz, with the .NET dependency injection framework, or the combination of the two, because this just does not work. No matter what I do with this setup, I can't seem to get this Twitter data fetcher reference passed in through dependency injection. However, if I switch this up a little bit and get rid of the primary constructor, everything seems to start working. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I just wanted to call it out because I spent a lot of time trying to figure it out, and for some reason, this is really what makes the big difference. If you're watching this and you're familiar with this problem and you know how to work around it, please feel free to let me know. But this is essentially what we have to do. And I just ran this to prove it to you, but you can see when I use the hover over of the Twitter data fetcher on the instance variable, it's populated with a Twitter data fetcher. So we do have that working. That's all good. And all that I had to do was wire up the Twitter data fetcher right on to the dependency injection setup lines. right at the beginning of the application, along with the config file, or just it's a config DTO, which later will load from a file, and pass that in. So those two things, the config for Twitter and the Twitter data fetcher, are registered on the DI framework. And then once we get rid of the primary constructor, it all just works. All right, so the last little bit that I want to spend a couple of minutes on is about how we can try getting these jobs out of the plugin API that we have. So what we had done previously was built a facade that would get the data fetchers, but instead of being able to get data fetchers out of that, I think we want to change things up a little bit. And one way that we can do this, and it's a little bit premature because I'd like to see a couple of these done manually wired up before we dynamically start to load them. But if I highlight this code and we start looking at what is Twitter specific and what things are parameters we could tweak, it starts to give us a little bit of an idea for what we want to provide out of the plugin. So you can see that we have something like a job key that needs to come out. So some type of unique name. We need to know the type that we want to have, and that's because we need to load this up through dependency injection and do add job right on this Quartz API right here. So we need to be able to do that. The trigger, we could probably take this name, right, that comes out, that we build the job key for, and just append a dash trigger. That's probably good enough for us. And then it looks like we probably want to have some type of interval that comes off. And I'm curious with interval, we can use a time span. So that might be interesting just to provide a time span off of that. So the way that I would think about building something like this, instead of going through the facade that we talked about before, is thinking about those different pieces I just mentioned, right? So this is not going to compile if I add it right here. I just want to type it on the screen so we have it. And I'll scroll a little bit more into view, but I would do something like an interface that we'd want to have, but it might be something like iSocial job provider, something like that. Not really great with names, and sometimes it takes me a little bit to come up with something. But I think starting with an interface like that, we would need some type of job identifier. So maybe to start, we have a string that's a job ID. And interestingly enough, a job ID might kind of make it seem like it's a single instance of the job, right? So maybe like a job type ID, some type of unique identifier for the type of job. And that would help us with this part right here for the job key, as well as the identity for the trigger, because we can just append a dash trigger, like I was saying. We also need the type, right? So we probably could do something like expose a type right on here. This is kind of interesting because I already am not a huge fan of this, and I'll explain why. But the idea is that I'm thinking I don't want to have the responsibility of each of these plugins to be able to create the job. And the reason for that is that I would think that I might want to extract this and put it in a common spot, and then I can just call it from one spot and populate it based on plugin data. But the reason I want to do that is because I'd like to keep the plugin sort of agnostic to this concept of Quartz. But it makes it kind of tricky the way we have it set up already, because that type that would need to come back is not really lending itself well to being agnostic to Quartz, because it has to implement iJob that comes from Quartz. Based on that, it means that our plugin has to implement or depend on Quartz. Not a fan of that so far, so we probably want to change that at some point, but I'm just kind of thinking through this out loud, right? Doing this kind of exercise right now is certainly premature. So we get the job key, we have that from here. We can make the identity for the trigger based on the job key. We want some type of interval, so we could do some type of interval like this and just have a time span. And really, I think that's mostly it that we need. But like I said, the big problem right now is that if we want to have this type that comes off of here, and that way we can end up passing it into the other method that isn't a type parameter, it takes in a type object. We could create all of this and we could implement that for Twitter. But I'm going to stop that for now, because I think that the solution that I might want to pursue for that means that we'd have to go create some type of wrapper class and then go back to this idea of some generalized job. So within our core application that we have, our Blazor app, it has the concept of working with Quartz. I don't want to push that dependency out to the plugins if I don't have to. It feels a little bit odd. But if I make a generic job inside of the core application, I can create my own API that I allow the plugins to implement. And that way I can take whatever that is from the plugin and put that right into our job that's really generic. And I can create multiple instances of that one for each plugin that we want to do. So I think that's probably the direction I want to head in, but I think I'll save that for next time. So hopefully you found this interesting. I know it was a lot to go over and a lot of jumping around, and if you're familiar with Quartz, this might have felt like a little bit of a waste of time, but if you're not, then at least we got to see how we can start to integrate a job scheduler like Quartz into Blazor. And then we started talking about how the plugins might fit into that. So this is getting kind of exciting for me. So thanks, and I'll see you next time.